Hello and welcome to Global Eye. I'm Parikshit Luthra. President Vladimir Putin has raised concerns about an escalation of the Ukraine-Russia conflict. Earlier this week, the Russian president ordered partial mobilization of troops. The exercise to call 300,000 conscripts for war duty is Russia's first such exercise since the Second World War. The move has likely been triggered by Ukraine's powerful counter-offensive and setbacks for Russian military in EAM and Kupiansk. At least 4 areas of Ukraine controlled by Russian-backed separatists have started a referendum, which is being seen as a precursor to Russian annexation. At the UNGA, President Zelensky said that Russia should be punished for the war against Ukraine, and President Biden said Putin had shamelessly violated the UN Charter. Speaking at a UNSC meeting on Ukraine, External Affairs Minister Jaishankar said that the future outlook of the war appears even more disturbing and the nuclear issue is a particular anxiety. Let's go across to Ambassador Pankaj Saran, India's former ambassador to Russia and also the Deputy National Security Advisor. Ambassador Saran, thank you very much for joining us. How worried would you be about a further escalation in the Ukraine-Russia war?
Thank you. I think the escalation is bound to happen because if you look at the speech that he gave to his country 2 days ago, it presents a whole thesis about what he thinks has gone on for the last few weeks and months. And he has also announced these steps that he's taking. And the results of the referendum will come out in the next few days. And I don't think there's any surprise that they will all vote in favor of joining the Russian Federation. And once that happens, they will, in the eyes of the Russians, become a part of Russian territory. And therefore, any attack on those territories would legally, in the eyes of the Russians, constitute an attack on Russia. So I think definitely we are up the escalatory ladder.
We're up the escalatory ladder. Do you also feel that Putin is creating ground for attack on NATO-controlled territories as well, with the referendum that is on and has begun?
I don't think so. I think his objective from the beginning was basically, and that was the root of the conflict. I mean, apart from the security aspects, the root of the conflict actually has been the situation in the Donbas region, which is these 2 republics plus the other 2 areas where the referendum is taking place. So he was really not interested in capturing or taking over the entire territory of the country of Ukraine. And this was the genesis of the whole conflict going back to 2014. So I don't think he is looking for a war with NATO. But what he did say, for example, in his speech, is that Western military and intelligence assets have now come within a few kilometers of his own border, the Russian border. And, you know, he referred to a couple of regions in Russia, which were actually the scenes of huge battles with the Nazi Germany in the Second World War. So the Western proximity to Russia's borders has grown, not in terms of troops on the ground, but in terms of military assets, intelligence assets, tech assets, satellites, etc. So I don't think he's interested in a war with NATO, but at the same time, he is preparing in case it escalates to that level.
Right. At the same time, Ambassador Saran, here you have a dictator who wants to protect his pride and who will always defend his decision. He will never show failure to his own people. That's why possibly they have ordered mobilization for the first time since the Second World War, called 300,000 conscripts. That exercise has also begun. Do you think there is a risk of desperate acts from the Russian government, considering the Western support to Ukraine will continue, this war is going to continue? If the Ukraine counteroffensive is stronger, then Putin will also hit back in some way or the other?
No, I think a lot of it, the answers to your questions are going to depend on how the NATO and Ukraine and the Europeans respond, because it is still time to stop all this madness. And everyone knows, the Europeans know, the Ukrainians know, the Americans know what kind of a solution is possible. And you had those solutions in 2014. The only thing is they were not implemented, they were imperfect, but everyone knows what the issues are. And in 2014, when you did Minsk and the Normandy format, etc., the West and the Ukrainians acknowledged that, yes, we acknowledged that there was a Russian stake and an interest. So I think a lot of this is going to depend on how the other side is now going to respond, because you can still call a halt to this if you, for example, get into some kind of a negotiation, you take any hint or any indication you're getting from either side. And really, I think this is actually the time when the major powers really need to show the world that they care for international peace and stability. Otherwise, you cannot actually proceed along this path with your eyes shut, because it will lead to unforeseen consequences.
Right. Ambassador Saran, also weigh in on the recent meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Putin and Subramaniam Jaishankar, the External Affairs Minister's latest speech at the UNSC, where he said the nuclear issue is particularly making India anxious, and he called on all sides to come to the negotiating table, resolve this as soon as possible because the war is taking a disturbing turn. Do you feel that India's stand is also now changing? India is more concerned about what's happening in Ukraine than probably what was happening in February or in the month of March?
I think so. I mean, I think when it began in February itself, we were actually quite upset about the fact that a military solution was being sought. And I think all sides are complicit in the failure of diplomacy, because that is what this whole thing is all about. The Prime Minister's remarks to President Putin are important, because I think he represents the view of the vast humanity and the vast membership of the United Nations. I don't think there is any country in the world who is comfortable with what is happening. And certainly we are facing the kind of a negative fallout of this conflict, which is taking place thousands of miles away from India. And insofar as the External Affairs Minister is concerned, I think he's also reflecting something which is bothering everyone. The fact is that you have 2 or 3 belligerents out here: the NATO, the United States, Ukraine, the Europeans, and the Russians. Now, these are the biggest, the most powerful, and the richest countries in the world. So they have to actually be able to show that they have the statesmanship to come out of this kind of a ditch that they are both in. And it's all about not just European security. It's actually nothing else but the fallout of the 1991 dissolution of the Soviet Union, which led to these imperfections in the borders between Russia and its successor states. And that's all that it is. And that ability to take care of each other's security concerns seems to be too much for the Europeans and the Russians. At some stage, I mean, we are all hoping that, they will have the ability to come to live with each other peacefully and like normal people. But it seems that this is elusive.
Right. Ambassador Saran, my final question. What is holding back the US, the UK, the West, and Europe from coming to some sort of consensus with Russia? And what is holding both sides of the conflict from coming to a solution or a compromise?
I think, unfortunately, this is a continuation of the Cold War mentality, where you actually are seeing security in absolute terms. And you are not able to recognize or accept that both sides have security interests. The fact of the matter is, if you look at the map of Russia, the Ukrainian border with Russia is the weakest link in the Russian Western theater. And this is where Russia's core national security interests rest. That is the history of Russia, starting from the Second World War. The Ukrainians know it. And so I think that is one element of the answer to your question, that whether we are now able to think differently from the past. Insofar as Russia is concerned, I think, it feels it has been wronged, it feels that it is under siege. The fact is, if in this conflict, both sides feel they are the victims, of either history or geography or circumstances, then it's going to be difficult for them, obviously, but it's also going to be difficult for anyone who tries to enter into this dispute and tries to mediate or try to get both sides together. Turkey has tried it, Israel has tried it, and I think whoever is willing to do this, we should encourage them. And India's voice is important. It should be heard more sharply in not just the United Nations, but among all parties. But, the fact is that, as I mentioned, these are big powers, and when they decide to do something, it's not easy for others to influence their behavior.
Right. Thank you very much for putting into context for us, Ambassador Pankaj Saran. We've run out of time, but this is a story that we continue to follow very, very closely, and clearly things are likely to escalate on the Ukraine-Russia war front. We're going to take a short break, but coming up on the other side, Italy will be going to polls as it elects a new government. A special discussion with author David Broder when we return.